Anti-Mage, an Isekai LitRPG adventure. Ends of Magic Book 1. Audiobook by Kevin. Chapter 24. Contracted duels. Nathan sprang into motion before the enforcement mage or golem had done more than look towards him. His only chance to maintain his cover was to kill the mage and destroy the golem before either had a chance to summon help or send any messages. If they did get a message off, he'd be reduced to plain murder hobo. His aura lanced out ahead of him, stretching towards his target with a speed only achievable by the immaterial. The golem immediately parsed his aggressive approach and leapt forward to intercept. Nathan's aura sliced the connection in the same instant, preventing the golem from reporting what was happening to the rest of the academy. "Wah," said the mage, blinking stupidly as he chewed on a piece of meat. Nathan tried to swerve around a table to reach the man, but had to jump backwards when the golem kicked out. The strike turned the table into a volley of splinters that shot across the large hall like crossbow bolts. A few of them struck Nathan, leaving tears in his clothing but failing to do more than lightly scratch his skin. The enforcement mage jumped to his feet at the sudden violence, panic sweeping over his features as he finally figured out he was being attacked. The man's training kicked in, and he raised his arms into a spellcasting gesture. He backpedaled to gain space and cast his first spell. Messaging. Nathan slashed a tendril of anti-magic through the spell, disrupting the communication and also breaking the man's mage armor. Then Nathan flinched back from a pair of light spells that erupted out of the golem's eyes, even though they didn't penetrate his aura more than a couple of inches. He swept his aura over the golem, causing the eye lasers to cut out, though the anti-magic didn't seem to hinder the golem's movement in the slightest. It's an academy golem. It's powered by wizardry, which will take some time to destroy. The mage is the softer target, and he'll probably try to get away to report me. True to his prediction, the mage turned tail and booked it, aiming for the exit on the far side of the large room. Nathan made a move to follow, but the golem lashed out again with a battering ram of a punch. Nathan used both hands to push off solid air, swaying out of the way and letting the blow leave a crater in the ground behind him. He used the space to accelerate towards the mage. The giant statue moved faster than any golem Nathan had seen before, blocking his path. It spat a useless fireball and held its arms out to the sides, ready to intercept Nathan if he tried to move past it. With airwalking, I'm never committed to any movement. No matter how it moves, I can adjust to get around it. The key is being faster to adapt than my enemy. I can find a way through any obstacle that's not a solid wall so long as I stay loose. Nathan feinted left and right by kicking out with his feet, then corrected mid-flight to bounce off the floor between the golem's legs. Congratulations, you have developed the high-tier tumbling utility skill into Parker. Utility skill. Parker. This skill will help you rapidly change direction to navigate a complex environment. Then he was speeding after the mage, who had almost managed to get out of the range of his anti-magic. Nathan's skills let him cross the width of the dining hall in seconds. The enforcement mage tried to cast message again, throwing a fearful look over his shoulder just in time to catch a foot to the head. The blow was so hard that the man's skull caved in and his neck broke. The body slammed to the floor and bounced a few times, leaving a trail of bloody gore before ramming into a table and coming to a halt. Magekiller has leveled to 167. You have killed Gordal Dho Satsik, an enforcement mage of Giant's Rest, as he patrolled the Ascendant Academy. Nathan turned back to the golem and immediately jumped upwards, avoiding another floor-cracking blow as the golem lunged across the room after him, leaving a trail of shattered and broken furniture. Damn, that thing can move. It's wizardry-powered, can cast several spells, and seems smarter than the other golems I've run into. No way this was made by Giant's Rest. It has to be part of the academy. Left over from when it was a dungeon. Now Nathan stood 20 feet in the air, considering the golem. He kept its link to the rest of the academy severed and watched to see what its next move would be. It tried to hit him with the light spell from its eyes again. Okay, it's not that smart. Maybe it doesn't really have any other options. Then it crouched to leap, and he jumped up and sideways to get away. He was 50 feet in the air now, and it was a stretch to reach his anti-magic down towards the animated statue. He probed at the wizardry, trying to figure out the best way to destroy it. The golem responded by grabbing a table and throwing it at him. The heavy furniture flew like a 15-foot wide spiked frisbee. Nathan skittered out of the path of the projectile, gritting his teeth as he examined the spellwork that animated the golem. He was pretty sure he could mess up the wizardry in the limbs, but that wouldn't kill it. He needed to wipe its memory in case it could report what it had seen. A couple of chairs zipped by at incredible speeds, and the wooden projectiles shattered against the ceiling and rained down from above. This isn't that different from what I put my anti-mage students through. Asking questions while throwing things at them to teach them to dodge. Effortless dodge 3 achieved. He was pretty sure the right way to kill it was to break its artificial mana pool, but that would take time. It would also point towards an anti-mage as the vector of attack. But he didn't have a better option, and he was wary of other golems or mages being drawn by the sound of smashing furniture. The golems are complicated, and what I'm doing is weird enough that I bet it'll be really confusing for whoever investigates. He got started, drilling into the mana pool and beginning to stuff his anti-magic inside. Partway through the process, a chair clipped him at fastball speeds, breaking his hip. But the golem's mana pool held enough mana to completely refill his stamina a few times over, making it trivial to heal the injury. Nathan redoubled his attention on dodging, using his new skill to erratically change directions and throw off the golem's aim. Parkour 2 achieved. The statue slowed down as mana was replaced by anti-magic, flagging as it was drained of energy. Nathan got closer to speed up the process. He finally drained the last of the mana, and the golem keeled over with a crash. It wasn't dead, just dormant. Damn, that thing was scary. I'm not sure I could take more than one of them in an enclosed environment. Nathan carefully lowered himself to the ground, cautious that the golem was only playing dead. But when he approached it only twitched slightly, and a glyph flashed on the sculpted leg. It looked like a place to input mana to charge the golem up again. That implied it would simply reactivate with all of its memory. He couldn't allow that, but he didn't know how to stop it, other than breaking the golem's magical tether with his anti-magic. I don't know what other options I have. From what Yellen said, Giant's Rest doesn't understand these golems very well, so hopefully they won't understand what happened, or that it was an anti-mage that did this. I don't have the time to figure out another solution. He laid a hand on the golem's chest and flexed his anti-magic, shattering the mana reservoir and cutting it off from mana as he had previous mages of Giant's Rest. The statue gave one last twitch and the glyph dimmed. There was still wizardry inside the golem, but it was fragmented and broken. Unrecoverable. Magekiller has leveled to 170. You have destroyed an irreplaceable giant golem of the Ascendant Academy. Void of Magic has leveled to 325. You have killed an enforcement mage of Giant's Rest and the last remnant of an ancient giant. Nathan stepped away from the prone statue but paused on seeing the level-up notifications. The last remnant of an ancient giant, an irreplaceable. He looked back at the golem, grimacing. There were mysteries here for sure, but they didn't change his near-term plans. He still needed to stay hidden while learning how to navigate the academy. He looked around the dining room, seeing that only a tiny fraction of the furniture remained intact. Breakfast tomorrow is going to be interesting. Nathan spent a minute replicating his feat of anti-magic to open the door before departing the dining room at a sprint. He returned quickly to the suite, wanting to avoid being around when the bodies were discovered. He looked down at his robe. noticing several splinters still stuck in the fabric from where the golem had demolished the furniture around the room. He sighed and took off the robe, folding it and putting it at the bottom of the stack of clean clothing. It would stay hidden there. He didn't want to leave any clues behind for any investigators. Then he went to bed to catch a couple hours of sleep before the next day. I'm finally inside a magical academy with a hidden danger on the loose, just like those books I read on Earth. But this time I'm the danger, and wow, is it stressful. The main entrance to the breakfast dining hall was blocked off by an enforcement mage, who was yelling for the low-tier students to climb the stairs to the dining hall they usually used for lunch. "Follow me," Hibber said before leading the group through a side corridor to another entrance. From there, they looked across the room carpeted in a layer of shattered wood, with the body of the golem standing out of the wreckage like an island in the sea. It was surrounded by various blue, yellow, and orange-robed mages. There was also a tall man in a complicated orange and red wrap who seemed to be supervising as the other mages examined the fallen golem. An archmage. Should I break cover to take him out? A few heads looked around when the opening door revealed Hibber, Ronnie, Yellen, and Nathan. A grating stomp to the side betrayed the presence of another golem, and Nathan quickly slid back into the hallway so it wouldn't see him. He heard a voice yell in their direction, tinged with irritation. "Low-tier students to the upper dining hall, I want to see your heels." "As your words command, Archmage Seekos," Yellen called out, turning and nearly sprinting past Nathan in her rush to follow the command. Nathan and the other boys followed, only slowing when they got a notable distance away from the ruined dining hall. "What in the giant's hairy ballsack happened there?" Ronnie asked, his voice bewildered. Yellen glared at him. "Watch your words." Clearly whatever's been killing people has attacked again and struck down a golem. "But you can't kill them. They're immune to everything. The defenders of the academy," Ronnie protested. "It killed a mage too," Hibber said, his voice shaken. "I saw a bloody body near the wall." Nathan decided to contribute. "The question is, did the golem attack the mage and was damaged enough to fail, or did something manage to kill both the golem and the mage at the same time?" The three low-tier students shivered, considering the options and finding neither one appealing. Brand Dho Jast, the lecturer who ran the practical classes, was pissed. He'd stormed into class that morning and proceeded to tear through the students, disparaging their magic and insulting everything from their parents to their magic. Nathan tried to deflect attention away from them, but he was unsuccessful. The furious lecturer stalked into their pod with a gleam in his eyes, then demanded each of them run through Force Block and Mage Armor. Yellen earned an approving snort, but Brand's expression grew meaner as both Ronnie and Hibber failed to cast a stable Mage Armor. Then Nathan pretended to cast Force Block without any effect and Brand exploded. "Waste from a steel screamer. You don't deserve the lowest robe. I should see you removed from the academy because I have seen no magic from you." "Ah, well, somebody noticed. Well, shit. Time to start Plan Murder Hobo." The man held up one finger, eyes boring into Nathan. "I give you 1 day. Come back tomorrow able to cast Force Block, or I will see you expelled and enslaved." He spun to Ronnie and Hibber. "If you cannot cast Mage Armor tomorrow, then I will break apart your suite and send you to other groups because they are more helpful than you are to each other." He looked at Yellen and narrowed his eyes. "You can do better. Come see me and I will place you with true peers." Then the orange-robed mage left them behind to go yell at other students. Hibber looked down and kicked the stone floor in frustration. "Giant's blood, I don't want him to break up the suite. I like you all." "It's okay," Ronnie said glumly. "Yellen'll be fine. Sorry for not being able to help, Nadhad. We tried." Yellen's expression grew stern and a bit angry as she looked around at the rest of them. "We can do this. We'll skip the theory class and go practice all afternoon. We'll get there," she nodded to Nathan. "You'll get there, not likely. Does this mean my time pretending to be a student is done?" That's a shame. It's a great way to hide in plain sight. Well, I have until tomorrow to think of a solution, even if it's just disappearing in the night. He looked back and shrugged with a faint grin. First, I need to duel Eben, which I actually expect to help cement my cover. Yelen's eyes widened in surprise. Ah, it's nearly time, isn't it? Her expression grew wry. If you lose and get expelled, his month of service won't carry much weight. He can use it to demand that Nadhad is enslaved to him, Hibber said with a faint snarl. Don't lose. I won't, Nathan said, trying to be reassuring. Half an hour later, he stepped into the dueling ring, careful not to disrupt the shielding that contained dangerous magic while allowing people to clearly see and hear the duel. He glanced over at Eben on the other side. The mid-tier student was joking with his friends, laughing about the expected victory and the ridiculous stakes. A small crowd had gathered to watch a mid-tier duel a low tier, and Nathan caught snippets of conversation about how unbalanced the rewards were, given the power disparity. A few people were shocked that the stakes weren't the other way around. But nobody intervened, since Eben was well-connected and nobody had a clue who Nadhad was. They just assumed he was a stupid new student who was about to learn an important lesson the hard way. Eventually, Eben turned and squared off against Nathan before calling the start of the duel. He followed it up with his first probing spell. Paralysis. Dispel, Nathan replied, swinging his hands and cutting through the spellwork with a finger of anti-magic. The crowd reacted with surprise, multiple people gasping at his use of the rare magic. He saw multiple evaluating glances sent his way. On second thought, this might cause more problems than it solves. I need to not appear too exceptional, but I also don't want to let it draw on too long. Dispel is supposed to take a lot of mana, so pretending to cast it until he runs out of mana is going to raise even more eyebrows. Eben eyed him with a thoughtful expression, cocking his head as if inviting a returning shot. Dispel, Nathan said in response, giving his opponent's mage armor the faintest poke. It shattered into visible shards that dissipated into thin air. The other students seemed to panic a bit, despite this exact thing happening the first time they'd met. He started casting spells rapid fire, trying to get through Nathan's defenses. Force Blade, Dispel. Paralysis, Dispel. Force Push, Dispel. Fire Bolt. Nathan gasped out a desperate breath and stimulated his sweat glands as the little ball of fire flew towards him. He needed to pretend that rapid casting was absolutely exhausting and that he was barely holding on. He spent some focus to draw attention to how much difficulty he was having, acting the part of the exhausted mage holding on by his fingernails. High-tier noticeability 6 achieved. At least he finally had the opportunity to end the duel. It was the perfect time to pretend to be on his last legs. He'd been using a single thin tendril of anti-magic to intercept the hostile spellwork, but now he guided it to narrowly miss the incoming spell. Spell Redirection. The tendril caught the fire bolt in its orbit, and the spell spun around the anti-magic before shooting back in the direction it had come. Nathan's pseudomates had been waiting for this after they'd helped him practice yesterday, and they cheered as the spell hit Eben in the chest. The mid-tier student went down with a scream. A few other students dashed into the arena, already casting moderate curing on their downed friend. They gave Nathan poisonous glares as they hauled a wounded Eben away. He didn't seem badly hurt, though there was a hole burned through the robe over his sternum. The audience broke up and started dispersing now that the excitement was done, but Nathan caught a few other people studying him carefully before walking off. They seemed to be noting down his appearance for future use. I underestimated how impressive that would be to a bunch of mages, even pretending that was the very limit of my ability. I hope none of them connect my dispel magic to any of the deaths happening around here. Forgettable needs to pull its weight. He put his hands on his knees dramatically, panting as if he just finished running a few miles. Then he wiped sweat from his forehead and faced his friends as they rushed to congratulate him. Mid-tier disguise 7 achieved. We've seen his heels. Hibber exclaimed excitedly. No more Eben Dho Gliz. Yellen was beaming, excited for his victory. What a sharp joke. He's had his reach cut short today. Nathan merely nodded at them, then staggered off towards lunch. He was subjected to additional attention there, but given that the terms of the duel demanded he be left alone, nobody seemed to want to come over and talk. Yellen called in a favor to get somebody to turn in their homework and pick up any new assignments for the afternoon lecture. Then they all returned to the suite to practice for Bran Dho Jast's demand. Nathan was torn about the whole thing. He was pretty sure the solution was just for him to assassinate Bran before class the next day. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it would hopefully let Nathan stay hidden for another few days. He needed a bit more time to learn about wizardry. Also, Nathan was sort of looking forward to killing Bran and maybe getting a different teacher who wasn't so much of an asshole. I've decided to kill him because he's going to expose me, not because he's an asshole. If being an asshole was a death sentence, then I'd have to kill a number of adventurers too. And maybe myself, given some of my methods. He'd found what he thought was the man's office on previous excursions. Better yet, he was pretty confident he could get through the door. If he went now, he could probably be waiting for the lecturer when he returned from teaching. But that would be a bit obvious. Before class tomorrow morning would be a better time, and he could plan out an alibi. For now, he had to play along and do his best to learn to cast Force Block while helping his pseudomates learn Mage Armor. He looked attentively to where Yellen stood like a lecturer, starting to cast in an exaggerated manner while she reiterated some of their basic instructions on how to cast Mage Armor. Chapter 25 Insights of a Mage. Nathan furrowed his brows, looking across at the 3 students as they tried to explain how to cast Force Block to him. It had been an hour since they'd snuck out of class, and they weren't getting anywhere. His pseudomates assumed he had Force Mana, as it was a requirement to enroll in the Ascendant Academy. To their knowledge, he had some kind of powerful insight that let him cast Dispel, but which made it harder to cast anything else. So they were just hoping that if he fully understood the spell, he'd be able to cast it. As a thief of sorcery, I could have done it. But then I would be helpless against wizardry. Nathan raised a hand, cutting off Ronnie's impassioned explanation on how he should think of the Force Mana like crystallized sugar. I think the mana won't flow clean because of my Dispel insight, not because I lack understanding. I'll keep trying, but this accomplishes nothing. Let's talk about your Mage Armor first and return to my Force Block afterwards. Yellen frowned at him but nodded, turning to the 2 boys. If you can both cast faultless Mage Armor, it might appease Bran. She launched into another explanation of Mage Armor, straight out of the textbook. Build the flows of force above your skin, starting with the 11 primary panes. Head, chest, back, upper arms, forearms, calves, shins. Then use those as anchors to build attachments, linking each of them to the other with Susu's insight of flexible force. She nodded, repeating the memorized words that had worked for her. Once all of the force panes are joined together, use Badud's insight of sympathy to link it to your body. Then the force will move with you and protect you from all attacks. Both Ronnie and Hibber listened with tired acceptance and tried to cast the spells. They failed, but they kept trying. Nathan frowned at their attempts. He'd broken a lot of Mage Armor spells, which gave him a practical grasp of how the spell worked. It wasn't enough for full understanding, but when paired with theoretical explanations and broken-down demonstrations, he had a pretty good grasp on how the magic worked. It involved the insights Yellen had just mentioned, as well as a fundamentally different understanding of Force Mana from what any of the mages in Gemor used. With his practical experience dismantling the spell, Nathan was pretty sure he knew what the two boys were doing wrong. They were following the instructions, but they hadn't quite internalized the proper structure that the force mana needed to take. It was a subtle difference, but it was enough to prevent proper melding of the separate panes of force. Even if they somehow forced themselves past that step, the magic wouldn't have enough flexibility to mirror their movements. They're a bit closer to how Stella casts force spells. Should I correct them? Yeah, because it'll make me seem more like a mage. Also, if I can't find Bran tomorrow morning, then it's possible that them casting mage armor and vouching for me will be enough to appease him. Let's call that the backup plan. He leaned forward, waiting for a break in the conversation. Let's try something else. Can each of you cast 2 simple force block spells instead of a whole set of armor? Then try to link them together with Ammo's insight and see how strong they are. All 3 paused, then shrugged and went ahead with his suggestion. Yellen was able to meld her 2 panes of force together in a smooth arc that maintained the overall strength of the spell. Both Hibber and Ronnie's final pieces of magic had a sharper, brittle junction that shattered under moderate pressure. Nathan nodded. The spells joined together, so it's not the insight you're having problems with. It's the force block itself. Go back to the basic force weave and try to keep it strong when you meld 2 of them together. Yellen was surprised by the outcome, but she was appreciative of his comment. Together, she and Nathan walked Hibber and Ronnie through rebuilding their force spells from the ground up, pausing only to let the 2 boys regenerate mana. It took a few hours, but with Nathan's senses and Yellen's recitation of the necessary insights, they made rapid progress. After the 2 boys could successfully meld their force spells together, they went back to mage armor, pausing only to break for dinner. The 3 of them ate quickly and returned to keep practicing. A couple of hours later, both boys stood proud in their very own mage armor spells. Tutoring 3 achieved. They suddenly seemed to remember that Nathan had yet to even cast force block. Yellen blew out a long breath, looking at him and scratching her nose. You know the magic. Your insight makes force magic impossible. Is that the truth? He nodded sadly in response. I think I need a development to break that limit. It'll happen, but not by class tomorrow. Mid-tier disguise 8 achieved. Ronnie tossed a half-eaten fruit across the living room in frustration. Then we're a splintered spell. Today was a prophecy of doom. No path for us to stay together, Hibber agreed, flopping onto a couch in frustration. He glowered across at Nathan before catching himself. At least it's not a failure of knowledge. Should we skip class and hope he forgets? Switch to a different class? I think I'd prefer to stick to my murder plan. I think I can come up with something to make it less obviously point to me. Nathan cut across their pity party. Raise your hands and see your strength. You both learned to cast mage armor in a day. It's an impressive deed. You have nothing to be ashamed of. He turned to Yellen. He's shown you favor, and if you claim credit for this teaching, then he will see the light in your eyes. If he moves anybody, it will be me. But if we do demonstrate our learnings, maybe then he will listen to reason. But for that, we'll need to do the homework. Nathan lifted both hands towards the ceiling. I am not ashamed of my talent, for it will lead me to greatness. We are mages of Giant's Rest who have learned new magic, and we will use it to raise Giant's Rest higher. His pseudomates looked around with new resolve. Hibber cheered. Yeah, let's feed mana to it and get these assignments done perfectly. Inspiration 2 achieved. Nathan rolled his eyes at the notification. Sometime later, Nathan went to bed, shaking his head at the last few hours of work. He was somewhat impressed with how his pseudomates had thrown themselves into their work, first learning mage armor, and then powering through their homework. It was night and day to how seriously they usually approached their schooling. Yeah, but contrast them with my anti-mage students. These kids are soft, spoiled brats. They've never had a truly serious challenge in their lives. The privilege of magic makes them deadly threats, but they haven't had to really work for it yet. Any of the new antimages would eat all 3 of these kids for breakfast. He took off his robe, placing it in the empty bin. Then he looked at the clean pile. Every robe in it was pressed and folded. That included the clothing he'd worn last night, which had been torn by splinters when he'd fought the golem in the dining hall. He tucked the garment in question at the very bottom of the pile, underneath all of his clean robes. He pulled out the garment in question and examined it. All of the splinters stuck in the garment had been removed, the damage sewn shut with an expert hand. He wouldn't have been able to see the traces of damage if he weren't looking for them. Nathan shot a troubled look in the direction of the central living area and the space beyond where the domestic slave slept. She has to know, or at least suspect, that I'm an assassin, but this took dedicated time to repair. Time she could have spent reporting me. Either she doesn't have enough agency to do anything, or I have an ally. Should I free her? Nathan exhaled a sigh. He could break the enslaving magic on the woman, but it would introduce a whole raft of complications. The Academy tracked her every moment, and it was likely that freeing her would trigger some kind of alert. He could try to blind the Academy inside the suite, but then it wouldn't be able to open doors for anybody. I don't think it's tenable right now. Things are stable and I haven't been discovered. I'll try to free her before I go full murder hobo. He slipped out a few hours later, leaving the low-tier student housing behind. His first destination was the room labeled with Brand Dho Jast's name. He'd assumed it was an office, but it could be the man's sleeping quarters, or he could be working late. Either way, Nathan would jump at the chance to kill the lecturer now, instead of having to find an excuse to slip out tomorrow morning. He was considering the least suspicious way he could get away from his pseudomates when he heard the first patrol around a corner up ahead. He reached out with his magical senses and could feel the mana pools of both mages and constructs. Dodging the patrols delayed Nathan's progress through the academy. He never saw them, but his magical and normal senses made it clear each patrol had 3 or 4 mages and 2 golems. The 2 golems alone would be a challenge, and he definitely wouldn't be able to take out the mages before they fled. There were more patrols than there had ever been before, and Nathan had to stay on his toes to avoid getting seen by any of them. Alertness 7 achieved. Eventually, he approached the door marked Brand Dho Jast and set about manipulating the wizardry of the lock. It was more complicated than the one on the dining hall, but not by much. After a few minutes, the wall slid smoothly aside to reveal a dark and empty space beyond. Nathan stepped into the room and used his anti-magic to activate a light crystal on the wall. There was a large desk that dominated the space, next to some kind of spell circle, and a finely furnished sitting area complete with a well-stocked liquor cabinet. He focused on the desk, finding what looked like a draft of next week's homework. To the side was a stack of graded homework that was due to be returned to them the next day, so he will be coming back before class tomorrow. I just need to catch him then. He examined the spell circle next. It appeared to be some kind of limited teleport anchor ingrained into the stone of the academy. The enchantment meshed with the wizardry beneath, seemingly able to cast the spell itself, targeting a hardwired destination inside the building. Nathan considered sabotaging it, but anything he broke was far more likely to just make the spell not work instead of causing Brand to die in a teleport accident. He just didn't understand the wizardry well enough to disable the fail-safes while leaving the rest of the enchantment functional. He turned to leave the office, gauging the distance from the desk to the door. If he was quick, he'd get to Bran in just a few seconds. Hopefully that would prevent him from casting any spells. He turned off the light again and left. The portal to the office closed behind him, and Nathan looked around the corridor. It seemed like there were several other lecturer offices nearby, and he'd have to watch out for anybody in the area the next morning. Maybe other lecturers are a target instead of a danger. Killing a couple of lecturers I'm not affiliated with might muddy the waters and distract an investigation. I only need a few more days. His next goal was the staircase locks, which weren't far away. He wanted to see if his understanding of the wizardry barriers was enough to break into the stairwells and finally traverse the higher floors of the academy. Nathan bent himself to the same task he'd failed on the first night, using his newfound knowledge and the increased dexterity of his antimagic to interface with the wizardry. He almost missed an extra alarm formation in the 5th layer, but a rapid squeeze of antimagic cut off the connection before an alert got out. The path slid open a moment later. Mid-tier aura manipulation 9 achieved. Nathan stepped into the space beyond, musing on the different ways he interacted with wizardry. He laid a concentrated tendril of antimagic across the wall of the staircase, attempting to absorb the wizardry that suffused the rock. After 30 seconds, the faintest groove formed in the stone. It was like eroding a piece of sandstone with a hose. His understanding of the wizardry of the academy was improving, and that was making it easier to both open doors properly and degrade the structure of the academy itself. It was still a lot faster to trigger the locks properly, like the difference between picking a lock and using a wimpy blowtorch to carve a hole in a vault door. He looked up the staircase before ascending. The door closed behind him, plunging the staircase into darkness. Nathan kept going, using his magical sense of the wizardry around him to guide his steps up the spiraling steps. It felt like he was moving into hostile territory, filled with uncertain threats. The whole damn academy and city around it is hostile territory. It's amazing how I've started to get comfortable here, but I know the layout and can navigate the threats, so it's not surprising I feel safer in here. This is why I disguised myself, so I could learn about the academy. But the upper floors are going to hold their own dangers. He climbed past a few more levels with locks that he could have opened. The goal was to keep climbing until he reached the top or found a door he couldn't open, then practice on that. He kept going up the staircase that stretched past the reach of his senses. There was some kind of magic in the central column of air that allowed mages to float up and down, avoiding the need to climb. But it wouldn't work for Nathan, and airwalking wouldn't be easier than the staircase. It would just cost extra stamina. Half an hour later, Nathan puffed out a breath and glanced around the total darkness of the landing. It felt like he'd climbed every stair in the Empire State Building. He'd been constantly checking the wizardry around him to make sure he didn't miss a step or stumble into a trap. But now he'd reached the top of the staircase. By his best estimate, he was about 2/3 of the way up the academy, far above where he'd entered. Wizard Senses 9 achieved. There was a proper door here, a 30-foot-tall portal that could fit 6 people through at a time. It was locked with 9 layers of wizardry, and Nathan thought it was just barely within his capabilities. He glared at the door in the darkness, able to feel both its physical shape and the magic within it with his senses. With a shrug, he got to work, starting by fully mapping out the enchantment. Then he sank thin tendrils of antimagic into the door and the stone around it. It stretched his antimagic to the limit, but with every move Nathan learned about the more advanced wizardry that controlled the heights of the academy. Wizard's Intuition 10 achieved. After almost an hour of painstaking work, the door swung silently open, and Nathan blinked at the lights of the upper floors. He took a second to examine the halls, noting all of the details he could. These hallways were even more ornate and decorated than those below, and the glow of the lights bounced off mirror-smooth stone and gilded decorations on every surface. Beyond the immediate area, he could feel something else. The wizardry around him and in the hall beyond seemed to be aligned in a discrete direction, like there was some sort of magical focal point up and to the side. Nathan stored the direction away in his memory. Mission accomplished for tonight. It's getting close to morning, and I want to come back here when I've got more time to explore the upper levels. If that door closes behind me, it'll take me at least 15 minutes to open again. That's a lot of time exposed in unfamiliar territory. I don't know anything about the patrol paths here either. He turned and hopped over the banister, falling straight through the air and force mana of the spell that filled the center of the stairs. He laughed as he skydived down the staircase, tapping the air to either side to keep himself centered in the shaft. He hoped that the academy didn't suddenly rearrange itself and terminate his fall early. I'd probably be fine. It might be a good chance to do that perfected body development. I'm in the middle of enemy territory and doing something pretty dangerous. A near-fatal landing now would be a good opportunity to take that talent to the next level. Nathan considered the idea seriously. If he just slammed into the ground at full speed, his body would be pretty badly damaged, but he wouldn't splatter. His body enhancements and skill-derived toughness would see to that. So long as he didn't die, perfected body would fix him up as good as new. The problem was his brain. It would get pulped against the inside of his skull, killing him before his talent could heal the damage. But that was the point of the new insight. He'd imagined it as a way to spend focus to continue his consciousness even if his brain was mush, keeping him alive until his stamina could regenerate him. I think it will, at least. I have a single data point. From that time I got clobbered in the head and managed to focus through the concussion. Am I doing this? It would be an ignominious way to die, but getting the development now will be easier than trying for it when a golem steps on my head. Is this worth the risk? His fall through the lifting spell had already replaced the stamina he'd spent climbing the staircase, and Nathan could always break into one of the dining halls to replenish himself from the magical displays there. His focus was also full, with everything he'd spent opening the doors already replenished by his rapid regeneration. This is a risk, but it's one that has a good chance of success, especially if I activate my rage. I need every advantage I can get when I face Badud, especially on his home turf. He won't hold back, and being able to survive even if my body is destroyed would be a game-changer. Davrar rewards risk. Nathan focused, centering his mind on his own consciousness as he oriented himself to land on his back. He could tell from the enchantments whipping by that the bottom of the staircase was approaching quickly, and he mentally braced himself for the landing. In the last few seconds he started spending focus, dedicating his attention to examining and maintaining his own consciousness as he triggered Raging Thrill for the toughness boost. Then he hit the ground in an instant of blurring confusion. His entire body flashed with sensation that was blocked by void of feeling, and everything went black. All sensation cut off, and his mind went numb and blank. But his focus was a blade, a knife that was the whole of his awareness. It rippled as if about to break, but Nathan held on with every scrap of effort he could muster. It was all he could do to cling onto the sliver of thought as it cut through the tearing darkness. The confusion cleared, and Nathan choked back nausea. He could feel bones snapping back into place as if from a great distance. He juddered in place and tried to open his eyes. It was a moment longer before they cooperated, and he looked up to see a blurry blue box hovering in front of his face. It was a moment longer before his vision came back into focus, as either his eyes or his visual cortex was repaired. But then he could read the text from Davrar. Congratulations! You have developed the perfected body talent into immortal body. Beware, it is harder to rank and develop non-tiered talents. Permanent talent. Immortal body. You have achieved precise control of your body at a minuscule level, and the ability to reconstitute your body from near total obliteration with focus. This talent will automatically spend stamina to efficiently and immediately heal wounds. It can also bring you back from the smallest remaining speck of living tissue if you have focus remaining. You can spend stamina to make innate changes which include banishing poison, countering aging, and restructuring your body on a minuscule level. Larger wounds and greater changes will cost more stamina. You can only die via total obliteration or running out of stamina or focus. Nice. Chapter 26, Professorial Assassinations. Nathan slowly pushed himself to his feet, wincing as things finished shifting back into place. He put a hand to his face, finding it wet with blood and other fluids. He wiped his hand on his robe and found the clothing damp. It had contained most of the gore when he'd landed, and he used a clean edge to wipe up the small amount that had gotten on the floor. There was still a red smear on the floor, but it wasn't especially obvious. Well, that's one robe ruined, but for a good cause. The robe was uncomfortable to wear, but it was hardly the least pleasant thing Nathan had endured. Nowhere near as bad as being buried underneath a pile of zombies. He examined the wizardry that sealed him inside the staircase, but his mind drifted to his newly developed talent. Immortal Body was incredible. With his massive stamina pool and the ability to absorb magic, it meant he was very hard to kill. Nathan let out a breath as he focused on the wizardry in front of him. It was simpler than the one high above, but still deserved care. After all, messing up would get an enforcement mage teleported in, or worse. He didn't need to draw more heat just yet. Once the door slid open, he set off back to the low-tier housing at a jog. It was child's play to avoid the patrols of mages. He felt confident enough to stop by the dining hall full of force magic to drain a bit of mana and replenish his stamina. Based on how many resources I spent there, I can come back from being killed twice before I'm out of resources. Maybe 3 times if I don't need to regenerate the majority of my body. That will only get better as the new talent ranks up, and in a fight both of my resources are quick to replenish. It does mean I need to be careful not to spend too much of my focus. I think it takes about 800 of it to keep me alive long enough for my brain to regenerate. Maybe more if my head gets completely crushed. It's inherently hard to test. Nathan snuck through the park in the low-tier student residences, noticing that there were fewer young mages out than usual. It seemed his murders had spooked them. He shrugged and dunked himself in the pool, swimming underneath the waterfall to allow the cool water to wash away the traces of his experiment. Then he climbed back to the suite, wringing out his robe above the pool to avoid tracking a trail of water straight to his door. The robe was still badly stained, and he hung it up in the corner of his bathroom to finish drying and went to bed. The next morning, Nathan woke up with everybody else, got dressed in a clean robe, and joined the other students in the main room. They were all nervous about the upcoming practical lesson, where Brand Dho Jast would examine their magic. As they were approaching the dining hall, Nathan frantically patted at his robe. Giant's ballsack, I forgot my homework in the suite. He turned and ran away, casting a quick "I'll catch up at class" over his shoulder. He ran through the corridors, careful to restrict his run when anybody could see him. But when there was nobody around, he turned on the gas, zipping through the halls with all the speed he could muster with stamina and 4 mobility talents. Once he heard the sounds of a patrolling golem ahead and diverted, taking a slightly longer route to get to the offices unnoticed. Once there, he approached Brand's office and stood patiently in front of the wall as his anti-magic went through the motions he'd rehearsed last night to open the door. A moment later, the portal slid open, revealing Brand sitting at his desk, grading homework and munching on a scone. The orange-robed mage looked up, confused as Nathan's aura enveloped him. His face was just starting to register recognition when Nathan's fist slammed through a multi-layered mage armor and into the man's neck, toppling him out of the chair. The blow was hard enough to break the lecturer's spine, and Nathan stepped around the desk to stomp on Brand's chest, caving in his ribs and driving shards of bone into his heart and lungs. With confirmation that death was imminent, Nathan stayed just long enough to ensure the man didn't have a healing item that would save his life. Magekiller has leveled to 181. You have cleanly killed Bran Dho Jast, a lecturer of Giant's Rest. Nathan walked out of the office 30 seconds after he'd entered, shooting a glance at the nameplate on the office across the hall. It read Kimmy Dha Finkra, which wasn't a name Nathan recognized. Seems like as good a target as any for a decoy killing, so it's not just Bran who dies. Am I okay with killing a random lecturer of Giant's Rest? He shrugged, stepping forward and starting to untangle the wizardry on the door. The lecturers held positions of power in Giant's Rest, and that increased their culpability. They were directly responsible for teaching all the flavors of mages. They taught the lessons that made new enslavement, enforcement, and war mages. The lecturers were a military asset and valid target because they were a core pillar of the traditions and infrastructure of Giant's Rest that let them attack and enslave others. They're certainly more responsible for the continuation of Giant's Rest's tyranny than a bunch of kids who are just trying to find their way in this messed-up society. The attractive woman inside had apparently sensed something was up, since she was already frowning towards the entrance as the door slid open. She was sitting on a couch, not at the desk, so Nathan's prepared thrust of anti-magic missed her. Her red glowing eyes narrowed, and she opened her mouth to ask a question. Then her expression grew fierce as he rushed towards her, and she barked out a quick spell. Force blast. A directional explosion blasted Nathan back slightly, with razored shards of force whipping against his aura. The spell was threaded with wizardry, giving the explosion enough presence and force to press against his anti-magic. He bowled through the blast with his momentum skills, stabbing forward with another tendril of anti-magic into the woman's reinforced mage armor as she cast the next spell. Teleport. The spell flickered and failed underneath the onslaught of Nathan's anti-magic, and one of the orange-robed woman's feet teleported away. She collapsed with a scream, and he stomped on her neck and chest a few times, using anti-magic to neutralize an automatic healing charm. Once his skills confirmed death was imminent, he turned to depart. That spell was loud, and I'm a bit worried that a foot appearing somewhere is going to raise an alarm. I need to get out of here. Magekiller has leveled to 198. You have assassinated Kimmy Dha Finkra, a lecturer of Giant's Rest and protege of the founder Badud. Nathan almost gawked at the description. Kimmy had been worth significantly more levels than Bran. With wizardry and as the apprentice of Badud, there was no mystery as to why. But that wasn't the most pressing issue. Clomping footsteps approached from multiple directions, and Nathan leapt into the air, getting close to the high ceiling before he darted down the hall. Other lecturers emerged from their offices to investigate the noise, and Nathan spent focus to divert their attention away from the ceiling. He zipped over 2 golems as they rushed towards the disturbance, and kept going over a couple of curious students who wanted to see what the noise had been. A few people may have caught a glimpse of him, but nobody reacted in time to slow him down or even call out. High-tier noticeability 7 achieved. As soon as he found a clear spot, he dropped to the ground and inspected his clothing. There were a couple of rips in his robe from the force blast and some blood on his shoe, but it wasn't very noticeable. Besides, he didn't have time to go all the way back and properly change. Not if he wanted to make the timing match how long it should have taken to run back to the suite and grab his homework. Nathan pulled his homework out from an inner pocket of his robe, where he'd stuck it that morning, and jogged to meet his pseudomates. He caught them as they were leaving the dining hall to head to the practical class. The news of the latest killings hadn't reached them, and the younger students were gossiping as he approached. Void of Magic has leveled to 338. You have killed 2 lecturers of Giant's Rest inside the Ascendant Academy. Hibber handed Nathan a large meat pie with a grin. Got it. Nathan brandished the homework. Yup. He stuck it into an outer pocket before accepting the meat pie and munching on it as they walked to the classroom. They entered their accustomed pod, sitting nervously as they waited for Bran to arrive. The other students were all present and were looking around in confusion. It wasn't like Bran Dho Jast to be late to his own class. "How are you so calm, Nadhad?" Yellen asked, frowning at him. "Whoops. I know that Bran's not going to show up, but they don't yet," he shrugged. "What happens is beyond my grasp. You'll show off your skills and I'll explain that my insight means I can't cast the spell until I get another class development. My work demonstrates that I understand the insight. Maybe I'll show off dispel. He will accept it or he won't. It's in the giant's hands." She seemed mollified, but they all grew more and more concerned as time stretched on without Bran's arrival. One of the students stepped out into the hall to look around, shaking his head as he returned. After almost an hour of nothing, a blue-robed enforcement mage walked through the door, looking around at them all in annoyance. He linked up to the sound magic and spoke loudly. "Practical class is canceled today. I will escort you to your rooms. Your theoretical lecture this afternoon will proceed as prophesied." All of the students filed past the blue-robed mage, whispering and muttering. The mage glanced over each of them as they passed, examining their faces for a moment before letting them through. Yellen was ahead of Nathan, and she returned the man's gaze confidently. "What happened to lecturer Bran Dho Jast?" The enforcement mage looked at her blandly for a second before snorting. "By the giant, the news will spread to all in a snap of the fingers. He's dead, murdered in his office." So was another mage, and the founder is furious beyond prophecy's hold. He gestured. "Move. You don't want to be around when the founder and the archmages sweep the common spaces. Return to your rooms." Mid-tier disguise 9 achieved. Reminded of the urgency of his task, the man turned away. He led the low-tier students back to the residences, watching as each group climbed a separate staircase back to their suite. The gossip was quiet but fierce, with the students once more speculating on what danger stalked the academy. Ronnie and Hibber had been sure it was a stealthy monster of Davrar, and they wanted to go hunt it down. The debate resumed in detail as they returned to the suite. "We know mage armor now, we can hunt down the killer. Then we'd be heroes," Hibber exclaimed excitedly. Ronnie turned to him, elated at the idea. "The giant granted us both the same insight. Let's go hunt this ghost down." Yellen's expression was mystified. "What blasphemous idiocy! You want us to try to find whatever has been killing mages all over the academy, break curfew to do it. That's a dungeon of fools." She spun to Nathan. "Nadhad, tell these fools the only thing they'll find is their doom." Nathan scratched the back of his neck awkwardly. "Yup, that's reaching for something beyond your grasp. We should stay here and wait for the enforcement mages and golems to fix whatever is going on." "I still think it's a malfunctioning golem. But you said that we were mages of Giant's Rest. We can slay this foe," Ronnie replied with a betrayed tone. "Mages of Giant's Rest have died," Yellen yelled, poking a finger at her friend. "Us going out to search for what killed them is a prophecy of death." Ronnie and Hibber subsided under the girl's glare, but they still looked rebellious. After a moment, Hibber opened his mouth to reply. Yellen cut him off, raising her finger. "Provide one good reason why we would be able to solve this problem." "The monster, or whatever it is, knows how to evade the security of the academy," Hibber said quickly. "The older mages are blinded, but we aren't. The foe won't be expecting us." He pointed around. "We can cast mage armor, Nadad can cast dispel, you have fire bolt, I have paralysis. We can do this." That argument seemed to sway Yellen more than Nathan expected, so he spoke up again. "This is silly. We won't even find anything. We'll just stumble around when we were told to stay here and then get in trouble when the patrols find us. Even if we do find it, it's killed 5 full mages of Giant's Rest. They had mage armor and paralysis and fireball. We should stay here. If they go out, it's just going to draw attention to me, especially if they get caught breaking curfew." His words seemed to center Yellen once again, and she turned back to the 2 boys. "Nathad's right for now. We need some more ideas about what the foe is. It might be a splintered spell from the nails, or an enforcement mage on a path of vengeance, or a broken golem. Once we hear more information, maybe. But we must all weave the same color and have a plan before we try to lift this weight. Ronnie nodded enthusiastically. Agreed. He shot a look over to Hibber, who was likewise cheerful at Yelland's conditional agreement. Nathan opened his mouth to disagree, but they'd already moved on to another topic. What a bunch of idiots. The low-tier students trooped into the afternoon theory lecture as a single group, sticking together and keeping an eye out for danger. They seemed to think that an attack could come from any direction and were sticking together for safety. Lunch had been tense, with everybody sitting close to each other and talking in hushed voices, like they'd be struck dead if they spoke too loudly. They no longer felt safe in the open spaces of the academy. Yeah, like how the villagers of Gemor can't feel safe in their homes in case a slave raid happens. Their lecturer didn't show any of the same fear. Barden Dho Shisk was a creature of habit, and just like every day, he entered the room as the last student was seated, ascending the stage and sitting behind the desk. The events of this morning are unfortunate, but not worth weaving extraordinary magic. Do not let these events disrupt your education. He glanced imperiously around the room. Now, we will resume discussing the process of magical meditation. With that brief acknowledgement, the lecturer launched into a droning lecture on how to consider mana. Despite the terrible presentation, Nathan found himself paying attention, feeling disappointed that he'd missed yesterday's lecture. The man was talking about an insight that would allow somebody to get the magical meditation utility skill, which would help people understand their spells and learn new ones by simulating them mentally before trying to cast them in real life. Holding the requisite image is the most difficult step to this insight, but the rewards are worthy of the giant. While it is possible to develop the skill to increase mana regeneration while meditating, the best use is to help with learning new spells by holding their shapes at every step. At higher tiers, the skill will help you see the transitions between different stages of a complex weave. And as I always say, understanding transitions is the key to magic. But it is not a skill one can use while casting the magic. It is for refining your spellwork before casting it. I think he said understanding transitions is the key to magic, at least 3 times every class. Still, this insight sounds useful. I wonder if I can use it to develop battle meditation. It's already unique, but the hardest part of this insight is holding a sufficiently complex spell in your memory while meditating. Mental Fortress should help with that. Several of the students around Nathan seemed to disagree with the lecturer's assessment. They'd been fidgeting the entire class, and one of them muttered loudly enough to be heard. If it's not for casting spells, then it's not worth the blood from our wounds. Paralysis. Barden Dho Shisk glared down at the offending boy, who was now frozen in his chair. Doomed fool. This is an insight used by the founders themselves. It is a necessary skill to learn the most powerful spells and climb to the heights of the academy. If your hands are idle, try to learn Disintegrate without this skill and then return. He turned away and resumed his lecture without another glance. The boy spent the next half hour paralyzed before the spell wore off. When it did, he muffled a moan and started surreptitiously rubbing sore muscles that had been locked in place for too long. Nathan listened intently as the lecturer described the insight of magical meditation in a few ways, annoyed at how terrible the explanation was. I've had about 10 hours of pedagogy to prepare me to teach discussion sections as a graduate student. I have a single teaching utility skill. This is his full-time job, his purpose in life. Why is he so shit at teaching? Why is every lecturer in Giant's Rest so bad? Do they just judge how good somebody is at magic and assume that's the only thing that's important? Nathan blinked and reviewed the professors he'd had back on Earth. Come to think of it, that hadn't been untrue there. People who were good at research were not usually good at teaching. It was hard to be good at both, and most professors were chosen for their research, not their educational skills. Bardon was just starting to wrap up his lecture when something unseen interrupted him. He stopped in the middle of a sentence and looked off into space with a frown. Then he sighed heavily and looked out over the students with mild annoyance. Follow. The founder wishes to address every student in the academy. We are called to the Grand Amphitheater. Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com Chapter 27. The questers gathering. Nathan thought about trying to slip away from the crowd, but it would have been impossible to be subtle. His pseudomates were packed tightly together, shooting confused glances at each other as Bardon Dho Shisk led the way out of the classroom. They were soon joined by other lecturers, each shepherding their own group of low-tier students. Badud's probably going to talk about my killings, but if he's gathering the whole student body, that's thousands of people. There's no way he's going to make us all demonstrate magic, and if he does, then I'll have warning before he gets to me and time to make a new plan. But this also might be a chance to kill him. If I can get close enough without him noticing, I should take my shot. The crowd grew as they continued through the halls. It soon became clear that their destination was the grand hall where Nathan had killed the high-tier student Rilrar Dho Magoa, after the mage had found him examining a particularly complicated bit of wizardry. That wizardry was the lock on a huge pair of doors at one end of the hall, which currently stood wide open for the crowd of low-tier students. Nathan and his pseudomates were funneled through the broad corridor. There weren't any intersections, just a straight and elaborately decorated tunnel that led into the heart of the academy. Nathan's attention was caught by several paintings on the wall. They were more detailed and realistic than many of the ones elsewhere in the academy. Several showed meticulous recreations of the world above Davrar. He compared them to his memory of the nighttime sky and inhaled sharply. The continents on these paintings were the same, but the features of the terrain were different. The landscape in the current nighttime sky was marked with white and black patches that almost looked like fungal infections spreading across the land. One of the paintings looked like it had similar markings, but they were smaller and more numerous. The others didn't have anything like that, but showed other things instead. One was enchanted so that portions of the continents glowed like they were aflame, while another flashed with tiny sparks. Nathan's attention was riveted by the huge depictions. But his gawking didn't stand out. The other students were also gaping at the paintings around them, especially the final one before the end of the corridor that was almost 30 feet across. It felt more vibrant and alive than the other images. It showed the world above, again with its recognizable continents, but several more fundamental things were different. A verdant green expanse stretched across a section that was currently a mountain range. Bodies of water, the size of the Great Lakes, were missing. A broad river delta extended into the ocean where the nighttime sky showed a huge bay. It looks like angry gods rampaged across nearly every continent, leaving destruction in their wake. Maybe that's exactly what happened. Nathan was still pondering what he'd seen when the flow of people carried him out into an enormous circular space. He'd thought the low-tier residence area had been large with its waterfall. This amphitheater dwarfed it, ascending to a dizzying height that had to be more than half of the height of the academy. It was maybe 1,000 feet across, and ringed by 3 different tiers of stadium-style seating, one above the other. In the center of the space was an elaborately decorated pillar, rising from the floor like a filigreed spike decorated with dozens of giant statues. At the very top of the pillar was a podium surrounded by a low railing. It looks like the inside of the Galactic Senate from Star Wars, except I'm pretty sure that the Chancellor's podium wasn't protected by a dozen golems. The gray-robed students had emerged on the lowest of the levels and were quickly ushered into their seats by impatient lecturers. Nathan led his pseudomates into the back row, the farthest they could get from the central podium. The tiers above their heads were likewise filled with higher-tier students, with thousands of white-clad middle-tier students filling the levels directly above, while several hundred students in purple robes were seated on the top level. Once the low-tier students had been distributed around the seating area, a few enforcement mages walked around, examining them all. They made sure to get a good look at all of the students, though it wasn't obvious what they were looking for. Somebody obviously too old maybe. Mid-tier disguise 10 achieved. They were done soon enough, and both the enforcement mages and the lecturers took to the air, casting fly to leave them behind and head to the highest sections. Those areas were a rainbow of colors, representing the various professions of mage. The lecturers and war mages seemed to have the most prestige, with the enforcement and enslavement mages in the middle, and the artisan and entertainment mages on the lowest rows, mingling with the high-tier students. There are as many artisan mages as every other kind put together. I find that surprising. Were these mages invited inside to hear what Badad had to say, or do they normally live inside of the academy? There were still some people milling around, but they quickly found their seats when a crashing boom rolled across the space. With a few final flashes, mages in unique robes appeared in private booths that jutted out from the uppermost layer of seating. The archmages. Badad appeared atop the pillar, tiny with distance. He fiddled with something on the podium, and the entire pillar was replaced with a huge illusion of him. He glanced around, nodding at the turnout. "Welcome!" The questor's voice didn't boom, instead sounding like he was speaking to Nathan from a few feet away. His voice was still commanding. "By Adas, it is good to see the gathered strength of the Ascendant Academy." Nathan was calculating angles. The amphitheater held thousands of mages and thousands more students, but they were all focused on Badad. He might be able to stick to the wall and ascend, getting closer to the archmages while staying out of the line of sight using his stealth skills. He even wondered if it would be possible to climb to the very top and drop onto Badad. Killing him in front of the assembled mages of Giant's Rest would be a nice statement. Badad had continued to talk while Nathan thought, his voice thoughtful. "We founded the Ascendant Academy to establish a society, an ethos, that would spread civilization across this continent. It was our desire to create an empire that could stand against the ending of history. No, it's too dangerous. I fight through a lot, but attacking here would just be short-sighted. I want to assassinate the archmages, not begin a running battle against every single mage of Giant's Rest at the same time. We taught you powerful magic, for Davrar is a place of danger and blood." The giant illusion clenched his fist. Dungeons and monsters stalk, ready to tear apart those without the power to defeat them. Nathan caught a whiff of a spell slowly spreading across the amphitheater. It was a wispy cloud of basic mana shot through with spider web strands of detection magic and wizardry. The spell seemed to be emanating from the questor, and Nathan frowned as he tried to parse out the purpose of the magic before it reached him. But the monsters are not the true threat to Giant's Rest. As we stare down the dragon's gullet, we must name our true enemies. It's a detection spell of some kind, but I'm not sure what it's detecting. Likely it's aimed at me, but I can't figure out how it would detect anything. The questor gestured with his arm, the illusion almost brushing the stands where the mid-tier students sat. To the north are the elemental barbarian tribes, a young people imbued with inherent magic that makes them a formidable foe. To the east are the woodland cults, who live in trees and fight from hiding. Neither build anything and must be taught the shape of civilization. Badad snorted with derision. The magic billowed over the first row of the stands, and Nathan was filled with apprehension at the approaching spell. It was an extremely subtle detection spell, but it didn't seem tuned to detect anything. There was no trigger or authentication built into the spell. To the south are the undead remains of the Sklia's dominion, a remnant of the endings that should have stayed dead. The quester paused, frowning before he moved onto the last direction. And then there is Gemor to the west, the wayward slaves who have been out of our control for too long. Nathan took a deep breath and focused, holding the structure of the spell in his head. He simulated its expansion, using the insight that he'd learned just a few hours before from Brarden Dho Shisk's lecture, aided by focus and mental fortress. When the spell sweeps over me, my anti-magic will interfere with the cloud of magic, which will be picked up by the strands of detection magic. There are a lot of them, so it would be tricky to manipulate the mana. Anti-magic stealth is supposed to protect me from this sort of spell, but it's not going to be enough against the wizardry. This is a spell designed from the ground up by an immortal wizard to detect anti-magic. Mental Fortress 10 achieved. These challenges are many, but the mages of Giant's Rest have carved out the largest empire on this continent with power worthy of Quenfi and cooperation worthy of Alida. When you weave the same color, the magic you wield can overcome any obstacle. Nathan was barely listening to the quester, frantically trying to figure out how to evade the spell slowly moving towards him. He simulated himself trying to nudge the detection tendrils out of the way, but saw how the wizardry was primed to detect such interference. He had to deal with the wizardry first, without interfering with the mana portions of the spell. And if I drain the cloud too much, then that will also get noticed. Damn, Badad must have spent at least the last few days specifically inventing this spell to catch me. Maybe I should just run. Congratulations, you have developed the Battle Meditation utility skill into Wizard's Meditation. Utility skill, Wizard's Meditation. This skill will allow you to remain focused and undistracted both on the battlefield and as you understand new magic. It will make it easier to predict and understand both wizardry and mana-based spells. Nathan looked backwards, seeing that the door he'd used to enter had been closed. The quester hadn't stopped talking. He was saying something about the importance of engaging in healthy competition, yet joining together when confronted by an external threat. In the giant's shadow, we are all siblings, and to shape the face of Davrar you must share the burden and the reward. He paused, looking around expectantly as the detection magic finished engulfing the entire crowd. Nathan was ready for it, and a dozen thin tendrils of anti-magic stabbed out to tweak strands of wizardry and brush aside their corresponding detection network. Over the course of 5 seconds, he made nearly 50 alterations to the spell around him, building a Nathan-sized hole in the detection grid. Then he compressed his aura back down and observed the spell, watching the drifting mist gently refill the places his anti-magic had passed without fanfare. Aura of Anti-Magic 10 achieved. Badad frowned, glancing around the hall and chewing on his lips slightly. His gaze went distant and a pulse of power went through the detection spell, following every branch of the network. You spend days building a specialized spell to find me, I hack it in seconds. How's it feel to suck at magic? It only took me a talent, 4 class skills, 5 utility skills, and an enormous amount of focus. Goddamn am I specialized for exactly this kind of shit. The quester sighed, then resumed his speech. We conquered this dungeon, the grave of all giants, to create a vault of solace for civilization. The Ascendant Academy is supposed to be a place of peace, where the next generation of mages can be trained in safety. His expression grew hard. But there is an assassin within the academy, lurking amongst us like a soul eater. His gaze swept over the different tiers of students, seeming to pan right over Nathan. Be cautious of those you do not know. If you see a lone figure, ask them to demonstrate a spell. If you grow suspicious, do not challenge them even if you have them in your palm. The founder's gaze softened into concern. This enemy can break spells with a gesture but cannot cast them. They can change their shape but will not fit in with mages of Giant's Rest. If your gaze finds somebody suspicious, message your instructors or find a guardian golem. If you are sure of the verified truth, message me." He paused, once more scanning the crowd. "If you find the murderer, you will be rewarded. But if you call on me and are wrong, it will be blood from your wounds." Nathan felt a chill run down his spine and glanced over to his pseudomates to see if they suspected him. They looked shocked by what Badad had said and turned to glance at each other and at Nathan, but their looks weren't suspicious. Ronnie's mouth turned up into a grin, and he poked Yellen's shoulder smugly. She simply rolled her eyes at him and nodded. Her gaze drifted to Nathan questioningly, but it wasn't an "I think you're a murderer" look. It was a "well, what do you think" look. Badad wasn't quite done. "This enemy is vicious and powerful, but we are Giant's Rest. I have requested the archmages remain in the academy until this threat is dealt with. Be vigilant and help us kill this menace. We are planning a prophecy of victory, and once this threat is gone, Giant's Rest will once more grasp new lands and peoples." He raised his hands in benediction. "Steal the fire of the gods, feed mana into your learning, and ascend the academy. I wish to see more of you ascend to Archmage and occupy the luxurious suites at the top of each tower. Too many lie empty, waiting to be claimed." With that, the founder shrunk back to his normal size, and the students took it as their dismissal. Conversation swelled as everybody got back to their feet and started funneling out of the multi-leveled amphitheater. They'd just gotten into the hallway when Ronnie rounded on Yellen and Nathan. "We're going searching after dinner, Hibber," the other boy nodded enthusiastically. "The founder said those who found the assassin would get rewarded." His voice broke on the last word from excitement, and he flushed in embarrassment. Nathan shook his head. "You heard him. The assassin can break spells, so we should stay away from them. I don't want to be the next one to die." "But that means we're perfect," Hibber said. "We don't know much magic, so it can't betray us. We'll watch every direction and find the assassin, then run away and report them." Then he had a thought. "If they come after us, Nadad can punch them like he did with Eben." Yellen chuckled. "It would be better if any of us can cast message." "Nadad, can you?" Nathan shook his head. "This isn't a good idea." Ronnie poked him. "Don't be a prophecy of doom. The mighty founder said that the mages of Giant's Rest need to weave the same color." Yellen. The girl in question nodded reluctantly, but with a small smile on her face. "I need to keep you alive so that you can return all of those homework favors." She looked at Nathan, raising one eyebrow inquiringly. "Friends climb the tower together." Nathan sighed, then nodded. He didn't want to do this, but he'd argued against it as hard as he could. He might be able to keep them from being caught. Besides, it was something that Nadad Dho Asna would do. If he wanted to keep up the disguise, he had to play the part. "Congratulations, you have developed the mid-tier disguise utility skill into high-tier disguise." Utility skill, high-tier disguise. This skill will make your disguises more convincing, especially in conversation. You will seem less suspicious even in doubtful circumstances. "Well, that's helpful. I'm still glad none of them are good enough actors to hide that kind of realization. Still, this is annoying. If I'm with them tonight, I won't be able to study more of the wizardry or return to explore the higher levels." After dinner that night, they prepared to sneak out. Yellen brought a dagger, Hibber put on 2 layers of robes, and Ronnie brought a sandwich. Nathan had given up arguing with them, but despite agreeing earlier, he wasn't sure if he should back out. Going with them and getting caught by the patrols was exactly the sort of thing that would blow his cover. On the other hand, if I don't go with them, then I kind of need to stay here until they return. Badad said to look for anybody alone, so sticking tight to these idiots is a pretty good disguise. But if a golem takes a close look at me, then it'll know I don't belong. "Coming," Yellen said, raising an eyebrow at him. He sighed, then stood up. "Yeah, maybe we should look in the stairs first. They're probably the biggest choke point. I can probably guide them around any patrols. And if they do get caught, I can always slip away without too much trouble." He followed his pseudomates down the spiraling staircase and into the curated park. A few students were enjoying the greenery, but they were all in large groups and watched each other suspiciously. Hibber led them along a hidden path and out of the low-tier residence halls. They were taking a small corridor that wasn't used very often because it wasn't very direct. Nathan had gone down this route once before to see where it led, but hadn't come back because there wasn't much of interest here except some geometric engravings he thought had something to do with divination magic. They looped in tense silence through the corridors, approaching the staircases. Nathan was listening carefully, ready to guide the group away from any patrols. He also used the quiet moment to peer into the wizardry that was tracking each of his friends. His new skills let him understand what was going on better than before. The academy was tracking some kind of magical signature from people, something about their connection to the magic of the world. I'm pretty sure that if I do my whole cutting people off from mana thing, the academy won't be able to track them. So any of my antimages could sneak around in here without problems. Interesting. Wizard's meditation too achieved. Nathan heard the grinding footsteps of more than one golem around a corner and held up his hand. He pointed. I think there are some golems that way. Let's backtrack and hide in that cross corridor. Yellen shot him a surprised look, but Hibber and Ronnie turned around without question. They hid down the hall, though Hibber insisted on watching from around the corner. Giant's balls. 4 golems, a war mage and 2 enforcement mages, he reported, surprised by the firepower on display. But we should look wherever they aren't, because that's where the assassin will be. Yeah, like right here. A pulse of detection magic flickered out down the corridor like lightning and washed over all of them. Nathan was caught off guard by the magic and failed to react quickly. He probably could have extended his anti-magic as a shield to prevent them from being hit, but he would have needed to be expecting the sonar-like spell. What? The patrols have never used detection pulses before. I thought they couldn't do it in the academy. As it was, the magic clearly pinged off the 3 students standing next to Nathan. Yellen frowned, tilting her head and speaking at the same time as Ronnie. What was that? I think that was detection magic. Time to run away. Nathan turned away from his pseudomates. He threw one last comment over his shoulder. Don't speak of each other if you get caught. Then he took off, running fast but not superhumanly so. He mapped out his escape route, grimacing as he mentally reviewed the local corridors. This hallway turned a few times, but it didn't intersect any other corridors for some distance. There was one branch up ahead, but it led to a dead end with a staircase. The rapid sound of stone feet clomping on the smooth floors indicated that the patrol was indeed giving chase. There was no way that the other students would be able to outrun the giant statues. But Nathan turned a corner and sped up dramatically, accelerating up to highway speeds in the wide passage. His best hope was to outrun the pursuing patrol until he could lose himself in the corridors. Then he could make his way back to the suite and wait for the other students to get sent back with detention or whatever. Well, that went to shit quickly. That's probably a night of exploration wasted. Though I doubt they'll try this again, and I'll have free rein for the rest of the night once everybody goes to bed. Suddenly, he heard the sound of more golems ahead, echoing around the corner as they ran in his direction. There were 2 exits to the local area, and guardian golems were approaching from both. They communicate with the academy. I bet they're networked together so that they can coordinate to do stuff like this. Got 'em it. Chapter 28 Questions of Identity. Nathan didn't have a lot of options, so he ducked into the side corridor. He might be able to fight the golems currently chasing him, but there could be more on the way. Fighting here would also link the anti-magic assassin with Hibber, Yellen, and Ronnie. It wouldn't be hard for anybody to connect the dots between Nadhad and the assassin if they had a pile of dead golems as evidence. As it was, he hoped his pseudomates would keep their mouths shut. Even if they did talk, they describe him as a student. Without evidence to the contrary, the patrol would probably just think he knew some hidden door that let him escape. I want to keep my cover as long as I can. I'm close to being able to navigate the academy on my own, but another day or two of practice will help a lot. He sprinted towards the entrance to the staircase, checking that the lock was as complicated as he remembered. It was. It was an 8-layer lock, which would take him a minute or two to open. With the golems pounding down the hallway, it was a minute or two he didn't have. He thought about trying to hide on the ceiling, but it didn't seem likely to fool golems when they were actively searching for him. Instead, he ran past the staircase, zipping down the remaining 100 feet in just a few seconds. At the end of the hallway was a display alcove for a 20-foot-tall vase. It was covered in elegant pictograms that looked vaguely insect-themed. Nathan didn't ponder the meaning any further, instead sliding behind the massive urn. The recess wasn't large, and Nathan pressed himself against the back wall to avoid touching the giant amphora. Unsurprisingly, the giant vase was heavily enchanted. Nathan wasn't sure what the magic was, but it felt like some kind of stasis effect. He pulled his aura away from it, sending it into the wall behind him. Let's try to avoid breaking that magic. I would prefer not to unleash a horde of angry hornets or whatever else might be in there. He felt the wall deforming behind him. With an instant of consideration, Nathan leaned into the effect, using wizard's meditation to aid his understanding of the wizardry that made up the stone of the academy. The material dissolved faster, and over the next few seconds he sank an inch into the wall. This is a conjured material, made real by wizardry. It's actual stone, specifically marble, but it never came from a quarry. It was created by wizardry. Wizard's Meditation 3 achieved. The grating footsteps of the golems turned the corner and Nathan stayed still. He could feel the magic in the approaching statues. They were coming this way. The giant golems started down the hallway, moving slowly and deliberately as they examined the passage. Nathan concentrated on keeping his aura down, making it as dense as he could and thrusting it into the stone of the academy. The surface he was leaning against started dissolving faster. He was slowly falling into the wall, an inch every couple of seconds. Nathan was already mostly encased in the wall, but that just meant he was trapped if the golems found him. Brute forcing it doesn't work very well. This is marble, so it should be mostly a mesh of carbonate crystals. I wonder if I can apply my understanding of the disintegrate spell. Break down the ionic bonds that hold the rock together. Congratulations, you have developed the aura of anti-magic talent into arcane nullfield. It starts at rank 1 and becomes more effective as it ranks up. Think about how you use your talent's functions to aid in talent development at rank 10. Beware, it is harder to rank and develop non-tiered talents. Talent, arcane nullfield. Your very presence denies arcane energies including both wizardry and mana. You can control this effect as an aura to directly absorb magic. This talent is especially effective against summoned materials. Absorbed mana is converted into stamina. The rock wall seemed to corrode to nothing behind him, and Nathan almost fell over backwards. He stumbled to catch his balance and extended his aura to continue drilling through the wall. The process was much quicker than before, but it slowed dramatically if he expanded his aura. He kept it concentrated into a vaguely Nathan-sized protrusion as he walked backwards into the stone of the academy. Hot damn. Not the upgrade I necessarily had in mind, but it'll do. The stone in front of him started to reform as the academy tried to reassert its proper shape now that it wasn't being brutalized by his anti-magic. A thin layer of stone crept across the opening like frost across a window, covering the hole in the wall. Nathan didn't stick around to find out if the golems noticed the escape route before it finished sealing over. His aura finally broke through the thick wall into another room, and Nathan turned to enter the darkened space. In the faint light seeping through the wall, it looked like some kind of storage room, full of shelves of vegetables. He shrugged and moved through the room carefully so he didn't jostle anything. There was some kind of magic permeating the room that discouraged decay, and he did his best to leave it alone. There was a door to the side, but he didn't head in that direction. If he went that way, he'd probably end up in the areas where the slaves that made the food lived and worked. He'd stand out like a sore thumb. Instead, he went straight to the opposite wall and used his aura to tunnel through it. If his mental model of the academy was correct, that should take him to a corridor next to the student dining area on this level, putting him in familiar territory and far from the patrol that had caught his pseudomates. As he went through the wall, he considered what this new development meant. He didn't need to figure out the door locks anymore, since he could just go through solid walls. There didn't seem to be any kind of response from the academy's wizardry, so it was actually less risky than hacking the doors. He might be doing some kind of permanent damage to the academy, but that hardly seemed bad. I can go anywhere I need to go, especially if it works on ceilings. He'd been slightly off about where his shortcut went, since there turned out to be a narrow service corridor sandwiched between the pantry and the hallway he'd been aiming for. It was deserted, and he glanced upwards. The ceilings were still high, and he jumped up to prod the bare top of the passage with a focused beam of his aura. The ceiling started dissolving just like the wall had. With airwalking, he could climb up almost as easily as using the stairs, though significantly more slowly. He couldn't dissolve the stone of the academy as fast as he could run. Nice. This is how I can get around. I could go up now. But I want 1 or 2 more nights of scouting to map out the upper levels before I start a murder run. I want to try to hit every archmage before they realize they're under attack, and that means knowing the lay of the land. And now, even if I do get found out, they can't trap me. Nathan went through the next wall, finding himself where he'd meant to go. He hustled quickly back to the suite, avoiding a few patrols as he went. Each held at least 3 mages and 2 golems who were using detection magic frequently. Why though? Maybe they think my anti-magic requires a resource and I'll run out or mess up. Or maybe they just want to catch dumb students sneaking around. He made it safely back to the residence areas, using his stealth skills and zipping up to the suite unobserved. He glanced through the opening carefully, checking to see if the others had made it back already. They hadn't, and he breathed a sigh of relief as he stepped inside. The elderly caretaker slave was sitting in her small workspace, scrubbing a gray robe through a basin of reddish water. Nathan ignored her as the students always did, but then his gaze was drawn back. She was working on his robe, specifically the one he'd been wearing yesterday when he'd hit the ground at a rather terminal velocity to develop immortal body. He tried to hide the clothing, she'd found it and was restoring it to normal, just like all of the others. Removing any evidence I left behind, she looked up at him placidly. Yes, master, Nathan chewed on his lip. You know what I am. Know what? She replied calmly. I am a slave of Giant's Rest. It is my duty to tend to my charges and ensure they are provided for. I would have you succeed at all your tasks. There was a faint emphasis on the all, which told Nathan she knew exactly what was going on. Do you want to be free? Nathan said, pointing at the slave collar around her neck. The elderly woman reached a hand up to touch the enchanted band of metal and leather. I cannot desire such a thing, for I have been commanded to be satisfied with my place here. I cannot reach beyond my role. Nathan thought about that for a second. This was the first time he'd been around the woman without his pseudomates present. He'd been dismissive of her to blend in, but now he was closing in on executing his plan. I'm not here to free all of the slaves. I'm here to take down Giant's Rest so they can't enslave more. But I can free her. Later, right before the fireworks start. What's your name? Her lips curved up in a pleased smile. Susa. He nodded respectfully at the woman, then sat down on the couch and waited for the other students to get back. He'd learn more about the patrols from them, and then leave to scout once they went to bed. It wasn't even particularly late yet, since they'd been caught so quickly. As long as the other students got back in the next couple of hours and didn't stay up too late, he still had a full night of exploration ahead of him. Then he could get through one more day and plan to start his spree tomorrow evening. Now that he'd figured out how to tunnel through the very material of the academy, he could make specific plans. He knew the archmages inhabited suites at the top of each tower that came with their position. At the same time, Badud was the most important target. But then there was also whatever the wizardry on the higher levels had pointed towards. That could be some kind of control room for the entire academy. Nathan mused over those thoughts, trying to figure out how to prioritize his targets both for scouting and for when he made his move. He expected Badud to have powerful defenses that would make it hard to kill the man quietly. He'd encountered Nathan's anti-magic twice before, and seemed like the kind of man to have multiple fail-safes. The archmages were more likely to be quiet kills, but if he messed up and raised the alarm prematurely, then Badud would come hunting for him. It depends a lot on what I find while scouting. I should be able to avoid defenses by moving through the walls, but it's unlikely to be perfect. I'll need to map out which archmages I can kill quietly and which ones will be riskier. Then I can make a plan for which ones I can kill before I go for Badud. Then there was the possible control center for the academy. He didn't know what it did, but breaking it might cause some real damage. If he destroyed the wizardry that coordinated everything around the academy, it might take the golems out of commission. That would improve his odds dramatically. He might even manage to disable the magic that opened doors and turned on lights for people. Then Giant's Rest would probably have to abandon the academy. It was definitely a place he'd like to scout out if possible. As he considered his plan, a noise traveled up the spiral staircase. Susa moved quickly to hang the stained robe out of sight and dump out the blood-dyed washing water. Then she busied herself in preparing snacks for the returning students. All three of them trooped into the room, looking dejected and beaten down. Yellen looked like she'd been crying, while Hibber had a blackened eye. "What happened?" Nathan asked from the couch, rising to greet his pseudomates. "We were shown the discipline of the giant," Yellen said quietly, moving to take her seat across from him. "The golems grabbed us, then the mages questioned us. They checked our magic, then mocked us for our deeds." Ronnie looked like he wanted to disappear into his own robe. His voice was quiet. "They told us we were lower than the giant's toes, that we should stay out of sight and attend classes until we had any worth at all. They said we were lucky that they'd found us, and not the assassin." He gestured to his friend's blackened eye. "Hibber protested that we were trying to help and they struck him." Hibber just nodded quietly, staring out the window with seething resentment. Nathan grimaced. "Sorry, I thought you might be able to get away like I did. Did you mention me?" "No," Yellen said, frowning at him. "How did you escape, Nathad? More golems came from the direction you ran towards." Nathan shrugged. "I hid. They didn't find me, then I snuck away once they were gone." She tilted her head to the side. "But their detection spells didn't find you. I was sure they'd catch you." Her eyes narrowed and she seemed to be thinking hard. "You wait." She studied Nathan for a second, then turned to Hibber. "How did you first meet Nathad? Disguise don't fail me now." Nathan opened his mouth to cover, but a sulky Hibber beat him to it. "An outer balcony where I'd been going to get away from Eben. He said he was also trying to get away from his own pseudomates." Yellen's mouth opened slightly, and she turned towards Nathan. "You can only cast spells that interfere with magic. Dispel and spell redirection. But are they spells at all? Or just assassin skills that interfere with magic?" Her voice raised in pitch, ending in a near shriek. Nathan shook his head and held up his hands. "No, it's actually an insight that restricts my mana types. I understand the magic well, like when I helped Ronnie and Hibber learn mage armor." She glanced at his shoes, which still had traces of blood from where he'd killed the 2 lecturers that morning. You want to go retrieve your homework this morning in the same breath that Brand Dho Jast was killed, because he demanded that we demonstrate magic and you couldn't, and you didn't care about Eben's challenge terms at all. Yup, she's got me. Seems like I don't get to do that scouting after all. Nathan sighed, then stood up and clapped his hands together once, then twice. It was a mocking gesture. Then he stepped forward to tower over the students as he extended his aura out to cover them entirely. Congratulations, you figured it out. But now what? Did you expect that I would surrender myself once you saw through my disguise? Yelen's indignation turned to terror, and she tried to pull out the dagger she'd tucked into an inside pocket. Nathan stepped forward and grabbed the weapon from her hand, throwing it down and into the table hard enough that it sank to the hilt with a squeal of abused wood. Then he shoved her roughly back into the couch and concentrated for a moment, changing his face back to normal, making it leaner and older. The zits disappeared as well, taking the constant low-level irritation with them. Ah, that's better. Ronnie and Hibber surged to their feet, trying to cast spells of their own. The magic failed in their hands, and they looked at him in horror. Nathan glared at both of them. Sit. He made it a command, and they looked at each other, swallowed, and then sat. I'm going to drain your mana pools, and then we'll talk. Both of the boys were speechless, but Yelen swallowed and got her mouth working. Are you going to kill us? We haven't done anything wrong. Nathan sighed again, thinking over his options as he drained the mana from the 3 young mages. He didn't start the process of breaking their mana pools. That was an option, but not one that really helped his current predicament. He didn't want to permanently harm them, he just didn't want them to raise the alarm. Either way, I'll need to move on the archmages tonight. My cover will likely last until lunch tomorrow at the latest, even if I kill these 3. They don't have message or powerful magic, so I can just lock them in a room for a day or so, even if I don't destroy their mana pools. No, I don't want to kill you. He looked around at each of the 3 students who were watching him like a cornered mouse watches a cat. You're kids. You've benefited from slavery and exploitation of the worst kind, but you haven't done any of it yet. His gaze hardened. But I want you to understand why I'm doing this, why I'm here in Giant's Rest. Ronnie snarled at him. You're here to tear down the giant, to annihilate what's above you. He half rose from his chair before Hibber pulled him back down. Nathan felt tired. He'd wanted to explain what was wrong about Giant's Rest to his pseudomates ever since he'd met them. Now he had the chance, and it felt like climbing an impossible wall. He looked down at Ronnie, and something in his gaze made the young man press himself into the couch, anger forgotten. He dropped into the couch across from the 3 low-tier students. My first interaction with Giant's Rest was almost being enslaved. I had so many things I wanted to do with my life before that. I wanted to learn about the world, help people, learn magic. Nathan let his head droop, looking down at the small table. He heard movement as Hibber tried to run and surged upright, crossing the room in a single step and throwing the boy back to the couch without any effort. I've had to listen to you for days. Now you will listen to me. He grabbed a light crystal off the wall, easily yanking it free from its mounting. He kept most of his aura away, but watched as the fragile magic flickered and died when in contact with his skin. He brought his aura back, and the crystal itself started to flake away in his fingers. The only way to escape a life of toil and torture as a slave was to become the antithesis of magic. He looked back at the students, who were both awed and terrified. Watching him destroy a light crystal with a touch seemed to have finally impressed on them what he was, what he could do. I lost everything I could have been to Giant's Rest, and the only thing I could do after that was to become the perfect weapon against you, against mages and all of the abuses of magic. Nathan's voice was growing heated, and the familiar ember in his chest woke to life. Because it's not just me. Every single slave in your city has had their lives stolen from them. You don't think of them as people. The slaves are things to you, resources to extract value from or be used for your amusement. If that kind of society is the only way to survive an ending, I say we should all die. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, the students hadn't moved a muscle. I will cast down Giant's Rest because it is evil to the core. Mages have power over others, and Giant's Rest abuses that power too much to ever forgive. I'm going to go kill the founder and every archmage I can find. Tonight. The fire had flowed out with Nathan's words, replaced once more with deep fatigue. He found that he wasn't looking forward to killing Badad anymore. It was just something that had to be done. Just as well that tonight will be my last night in the academy. I hadn't realized how close I was to snapping. He rubbed his temples and addressed the young mages. I haven't seen you three do any of the things that make Giant's Rest evil. I think you would if you became mages of Giant's Rest. But I'm not in a position to judge you. However, somebody here is. Susa. Yes, master. The old woman stepped forward, her expression tightly controlled. There seemed to be some kind of internal conflict going on inside her, and her hands jerked forward slightly before coming back to rest at her side. I'm going to free you now. He stood and approached her, weaving his anti-magic into her collar to break the enchantment before ripping the tough leather off her neck with his bare hands. The $100 question is, will the Academy notice? It did, the wizardry in the walls concentrating attention on the woman. She stood stunned in place at the loss of the magic that had controlled her for decades. Nathan grimaced and surrounded Susa with a shell of anti-magic, preventing the wizardry from getting a lock on her. To prevent the Academy from seeing that I've done that, I need to cut you off from magic forever. The only other option is that you stay with me as I attack the founder. Susa drew in a raggedy breath and swallowed twice before speaking. Do it. He nodded and severed her from magic, saturating her body in anti-magic as he did it. The Academy can't track you anymore, and it won't open any doors for you anymore. If you have a free talent, then you should have the option to take the magic resistance talent. Don't take it unless you really want to, since it will also prevent you from being healed. If I don't see you again, go to Housemate. They know insights that will let you heal yourself regardless. I hope. Then he retracted the shield of anti-magic and nodded in satisfaction when the Academy's attention drifted onwards, no longer registering that there was a free person where there should be a slave. He turned and walked back towards the students, whose gazes tracked him carefully. He wrenched the dagger out of the table and handed it to Susa. You've known them a lot longer than I have. If you want to kill them, I will help. The old woman's expression was intent, focused in a way that Nathan had never seen on her face. She looked down at the dagger and reached out to grasp it, feeling its heft. She smiled sadly. Their deeds don't deserve death. Some of the tension drained from the room, and Susa explained in slow words. I have been caretaker for many students. I know true malice, and these three do not bear it. She pointed past Nathan to his empty bedroom. Help me herd them in there and wedge the door shut. I have long dreamed of speaking to my charges of the life of a slave. I will give them a lesson they would never learn from a mage. Nathan nodded and gestured for the three mages to stand. They didn't resist as he herded them inside his bedroom. Listen to what she says. If you are mages of Giant's Rest the next time we meet, I'll kill you. All you've done here is kill, Yellen said quietly. Nathan paused, his hand on the door. He waited until her eyes flicked up to meet his. There aren't many other options when facing Giant's Rest. I've spared the people I could. 24 mages from the Battle of Housemate live stripped of their magic. Harthai Dha Jalter is now an enchanter in Gemor. If you don't abuse your magic and enslave people, then I won't be your enemy. But I will raze this academy to the ground. Inspiration 3 achieved. He closed the door, breaking the enchantment that would cause it to meld with the wall. Then he turned and grabbed a chair, breaking the wood into pieces and shoving them into the cracks to act as makeshift wedges. Once the door was firm, he turned back to Sousa. "I'm sorry, this isn't a good spot for you. Thank you for giving me another option. I'll come back for you if I can." She smiled back at him. "Thank you. I long promised myself I would be happy if I could change the path of even one student away from enslaving others. Now I have that chance thrice over. May Algoa's luck ride with you." Her face twisted as Nathan turned to leave. "If you meet Codius Dho Den, kill him." Nathan reached back in his memory, searching for the familiar name. After a moment, he found it in the mage who tried to bully him in Housemate when Phaline had led him to the mage barracks. "Already killed him." This time her smile was vicious. "Good. Now go and bring doom to the archmages, for all those who wished they could and never had the chance." Chapter 29. An assassin unleashed. With a final nod to Sousa, Nathan stepped into Hibber's room to get out of sight. He extended his aura and bored an upwards angled hole in the wall. His goal lay high in the gigantic building, and the main exit from the suite would take him down a few hundred feet into the park at the center of the low-tier residence hall. Also, the lowest levels are likely to have the densest patrols because that's where I've killed the most people. He reached out with his magical senses, feeling around through the material of the academy for open spaces. He didn't want to pop out in the middle of a hallway by accident, but he also didn't want to climb the height of the entire academy inside the rock. Not only would it be slow, but unless he wanted to travel at a fairly shallow angle, he'd need to spend stamina on airwalk. And since the tunnel was sealing up behind him, eventually he'd run out of air. I can use my aura to carve out stairs, but that would be even slower. Come on, there's gotta be a hallway somewhere over here. He was also worried about running into some important piece of magic and breaking it by accident. While damaging the magic of the academy wasn't a problem, he didn't want to give the Giant's Rest mages who ran the academy any clues as to what was going on. His ability to tunnel through the academy seemed like an ace he'd like to keep up his sleeve as long as possible. He didn't want to give the mages any reason to try to manually track him burrowing through the academy. Nathan felt a void in the wizardry ahead of him. It was embarrassingly close. He just hadn't felt it through the magic that surrounded him. Wizard senses 10 achieved. He approached the wall and poked out a spike of condensed anti-magic to bore a small hole in the stone, giving him a peephole into the space beyond. It was a corridor he wasn't familiar with. But he didn't hear anything, so Nathan enlarged the hole to give him a broader range of vision. Sure enough, the corridor was deserted. He broke through the wall, stepping out into the corridor and thinking over his options. His goal was pretty simple: go up. Everything he was interested in was at the top of the academy. Badud was probably at the top of the tallest tower, but most of the other towers should also have archmages living in their peaks. He also wanted to investigate the place all of the wizardry had been pointing to. He didn't know what was there, but it was also high up. Though he didn't think it was at the top of a tower. I'm not sure what to go after first. On one hand, the wizardry signal might be the heart of the academy, and killing it could be incredibly valuable. But it's an uncertain reward. My most tangible goal is killing Badud, but that's also probably the hardest task. I should go after some archmages first. Then they won't be able to escape or help Badud if we fight later. They should also give me enough levels to develop Magekiller. That will make killing Badud a whole lot easier. Maybe my priority should be archmages and levels until that point. Nathan shrugged, looking around. He knew generally where he was in the academy, but the place was huge. He wasn't sure where the central tower was in relation to him, or the other towers for that matter. This was the problem he'd been hoping to solve with another day or two of scouting, but he hadn't gotten that chance. He had the advantage of surprise for one night, and he intended to use it. With a sigh, Nathan started looking for a staircase, willing to spend a few minutes trying to find a faster way to ascend the academy. If he couldn't find one, he would just tunnel up to a new level and look again. He spent 15 minutes jogging towards where a staircase should be, only having to dodge a single patrol. The staircase wasn't quite where he thought it was, and he ran around in circles for a few minutes, sweeping the area before he detected a wizardry lock on an inconspicuous wall. With a grin, he went through the wall next to the lock, pleased with how much easier it was to access the stairs now that he didn't have to mess with the complicated door spells. Then he climbed the stairs rapidly, trying to hit the sweet spot between stamina expenditure and maximum speed. He was going to climb a lot of stairs today. It took a while to hit the top of this staircase, where he found a more complex piece of wizardry blocking the entrance. It was once again easily bypassed, and Nathan peeked through a small hole into the upper levels of the academy. Previously, he'd only gotten a single glance at these upper floors, and he'd been astonished by the level of opulence on display. He'd also noticed a directionality to the wizardry towards some sort of central point high up in the academy. That was still present, but what grabbed his attention was a golem standing guard right outside the staircase, posed to examine anybody who entered higher floors. Luckily enough, his peephole hadn't been spotted, so Nathan carefully backed away from the wall. Then he jumped upwards and into the ceiling. The stone between each floor of the academy was thick, and Nathan crouched down to fit fully between the ceiling of one level and the floor of the next. He created another small hole to inspect the space above. It appeared to be a well-lit and luxurious bedroom. After a moment, he heard the sound of a page turning. Enlarging his peephole, he saw a handsome middle-aged woman wearing an orange robe. She was sitting in an overstuffed armchair, reading a book. Lecturers are a fair target. I also need to refill my stamina. Nathan crawled horizontally through the floor, ending up directly in front of the armchair. Then he stood up, using his aura to push through the layer of stone directly overhead. It took a second for even the thin layer of stone to disappear, giving the lecturer a second of warning as the floor at her feet evaporated. She reacted by lurching backwards in the chair, causing it to topple over and sending her sprawling. The woman tried to cast message, but Nathan had already wrapped her in his aura. He hopped out of the hole in the floor, moving around the overturned chair and dropping to the ground to clamp a hand over the mage's mouth. Shush! He spun his aura into her mana pool, overfilling his stamina as the woman struggled in vain. Now what? I could also break her magic instead of killing her. I know that knocks people out for a while, and she'll be trapped in her room since the academy won't open doors for her anymore. He considered it for a moment, but eventually decided the risk wasn't worth it. She'd seen that he could burrow through the academy, and somebody would probably come looking for her eventually. It could cut down his grace period unacceptably far. Nathan drained her magic to replenish his stamina, then snapped her neck. He paused to make sure the wound was fatal before he moved on. Magekiller has leveled to 209. You have assassinated Meave Dha Takunza, a senior lecturer of Giant's Rest. He righted the chair, scooting it back so it wouldn't fall into the slowly healing hole in the floor. Then he glanced around the room for a second, looking for a place to hide the body. With a shrug, he carried the corpse over to the bathroom, leaving it on the floor and closing the door. I don't know what will happen if I leave her body inside the stone of the academy. It might stay entombed, or it might get squished out a random wall, or throw up some kind of alarm since her body's not shielded from detection magic like I am. He turned back to the ceiling, going up yet another level. This time he ended up in what looked like a more advanced version of the practical magic classroom, with several powerful enchantments to isolate dangerous spell casting. It was deserted, and Nathan kept climbing, burning off his excess stamina with repeated uses of airwalk to ascend nearly straight upwards. He decided against finding another staircase, both because he didn't know where any were this high up in the academy, and because he suspected that the staircases were being guarded by golems. He climbed through dozens more floors, checking each time that the next space was unoccupied by boring a small hole first. On 2 occasions he had to divert, once finding a half-dozen mid-tier students studying fly under the supervision of a high-tier student in a huge room seemingly built for the purpose. The second time was an orgy, which made Nathan blink for a moment. He departed quickly, grinding his teeth in frustration. Nobody in there had been wearing robes, but he was pretty sure both professors and students had been present, and some of the attendees had definitely been slaves. You've got more important priorities. There were other rooms Nathan wished he could linger in, ranging from a library thick enough with dust he thought it might have been totally forgotten, to an enchanting workshop filled with half-completed gizmos. In both cases, he had to restrain himself from stopping to examine the rooms and their magic, and continue going upwards. He kept an eye on the directionality of the wizardry, noticing the angle change as he moved. The source of the wizardry seemed to be high up in the academy, and he'd placed bets it was in the center. Arcane Nullfield 2 achieved. Finally, he broke through the floor of a viewing gallery. One wall was covered with broad windows that showed a dozen towers rising into the sky. They were dominated by one spire that was taller and thicker than the rest. It was nighttime, but the magical decorations of the academy illuminated the top of the giant building in a shifting, mystical light. Nathan paused to get his bearings, using the view out the window to place himself inside one of the medium-height towers that stood above the bulk of the academy. If his assumptions were correct, then there'd be an archmage living in a luxury suite at the top. Badud would be at the top of another, more central and taller tower. Great. Let's check the top and see what we find. He veered towards the center of the tower, looking for the stairs. He found that the center of the tower was a huge open shaft with a staircase made from opalescent stone spiraling around it. The open space was occupied by a grand artwork made of visible flows of magic. Nathan looked around carefully, not trusting the beautiful display to be completely benign. He spotted a pair of golems standing guard at the very bottom of the shaft, completely blocking the start of the stairs. He'd successfully avoided them by going up through the rooms off the staircase. He couldn't detect anybody else. He climbed carefully and quickly, stopping only to bypass a few subtly laid alarm enchantments on the stairs by slipping through the adjoining walls. At the top of the shaft he found a broad door, engraved in glowing letters with a name and series of titles. Archmage Khan Dho Granon, fourth finger of the Ascendant Academy, Master of Scargus. The door was a masterwork of mana-based enchantment that looked to Nathan's magical senses like the internals on a Swiss watch, all built with interlocking constructs and masterful interweavings. Beneath that was a 14-layer wizardry lock that was among the more complex he'd ever seen. By skipping these barriers, I'm probably denying myself a few skill levels. But it would take hours that I don't have to figure out that lock. Nathan moved sideways to a section of blank wall. In addition to the standard wizardry of the academy, there was a complex layer of earth, force, and spatial magic woven into the walls. The spell seemed built to make the wall much tougher and prevent any kind of teleportation into the space beyond. He shrugged and peeled apart the reinforcement net, poking a small hole and finding himself looking at mundane woodgrain that was probably the back of a piece of furniture. Sighing, he moved farther over and repeated the same procedure a couple of times until he found himself looking into a bathroom. Mid-tier aura manipulation 10 achieved. Good enough. This enchantment is a pain to tease apart, and it seems to cover the apartment from all sides, so I won't be able to tunnel through the floor. It's definitely surmountable, but I hope it isn't standard issue for the Archmage suites. The bathroom door opened into a small room that looked like a discussion space, set with comfortable chairs and bookshelves on the wall that had stymied Nathan earlier. The chairs faced a central seat that was elevated above the others, clearly a place for the Archmage to hold court over any guests who had gathered to hear them lecture. His senses were alert as he crept through the room, listening for any noise, ready for any magic that might give his presence away. There was plenty of magic, but none of it seemed tuned for security. It seemed like this was the inner sanctum. There were no signs that anybody was home. Maybe the Archmage isn't in the academy. I thought Badad commanded them all to return. The next room led into a larger library, and Nathan inhaled the comforting scent of well-preserved books. He passed through quickly, careful not to disturb any of the delicate enchantments that maintained the densely packed space. He poked a hole in the wall next to the subsequent door. Looking through revealed a huge bedroom with broad windows that allowed the shifting color of the academy to shine in and illuminate the space. There was a single rugged-looking older man in the bed, with a bald head and a salt-and-pepper beard. He was sound asleep, but Nathan could tell he had an enormous monopool. Bingo! Nathan tunneled through the wall, walking an inch above the ground as he entered the room to avoid making any noise. It looked like the bedroom of a rich bachelor, with piles of clothing scattered around sumptuous furniture. When he hit the halfway point of the room, Nathan snapped his aura forward like a snake strike, engulfing the man in anti-magic powerful enough to deny any spell. The Archmage didn't react at all. Nathan moved the last few feet cautiously, not letting his guard down. Every other Archmage he'd fought had been a monster, capable of powerful spells that had challenged his anti-magic. The goal had always been to assassinate them in their sleep, but Nathan hadn't really expected to succeed. Nonetheless, he successfully closed his hands around the man's neck and squeezed tightly, cutting off both blood flow and air. The man's eyes fluttered and he bucked once, but then he settled back into unconsciousness, at which point Nathan drained the man's mana pool to refill his stamina. A couple of minutes of strangulation later, Nathan got a notification. Magekiller has leveled to 225. You have assassinated Archmage Khan Dho Granon, the master of Scargus, in his own quarters inside the Ascendant Academy. All right, one down. Now time to do it again. Nathan sighed and stood up from the bed, retracting his aura and retracing his steps to leave the suite. Then he started back down the tower, plotting his path to the next one. The academy had only grown more deserted with the late hour, and Nathan was easily able to circle around the upper levels to reach his next target. The setup in the next tower over was similar, though not quite identical. The tower itself was shorter and a bit thinner. There were another set of golems guarding the base of the staircase, but a trickle of people were leaving, many looking disheveled but pleasantly sated. Another orgy. At least it looks like it's wrapping up. Nathan bypassed the golems just as he had previously, ready for surprises but finding none. This time he avoided the staircases the entire way up to avoid the departing guests. He aimed for where the bedroom should be, finding no extra magic to reinforce the wizardry of the academy. He poked an exploratory peephole up into the room and was splashed in the face with soapy water. Nathan recoiled, wiping his eyes and getting out of the way of the warm liquid. There wasn't a ton of water, but it was like he'd drilled into a soapy puddle. The room beyond was a bathroom that looked like it had been heavily used recently, but was currently deserted. At least it was clean water. Grimacing, Nathan moved over 20 feet, probing upwards once again to see the bottom of a dining table. After ascertaining that the room was empty, he entered the room before starting to scout what was nearby. It looked like the center of the tower had been converted to a giant area strewn with couches and pillows, and while some people were prying themselves up and heading out, a few dozen remained behind, intent on sleeping off their recent exertions. None of them were wearing much, and Nathan reached out with his senses to see if he could find the archmage amongst the sprawled bodies. A few of them had larger mana pools, but they were more reminiscent of a war mage than an archmage. Nathan moved onto the other rooms, finding that the next room over was a library, though it didn't seem to get much use. Half of the shelves stood bare. On a hunch, Nathan moved through the wall into the library and then across it, peeking into the next room with another small hole. The room beyond was the bedroom, with a bed 3 times as large as the one in the last Archmage's tower. There were almost a dozen people sprawled across the expansive mattress, all asleep in post-coital exhaustion. Okay, so it's a similar layout, just rotated so the bedroom of every tower looks out over the academy instead of the city. Got it. Nathan focused on the bed, trying to discern which of the figures was the archmage. It wasn't hard. There were 8 women and 3 men. All were young and nubile, except for one middle-aged man. He looked like he'd once been well-muscled but had started drifting to flabby in recent years. He also had more mana than everybody else put together, reinforcing Nathan's hypothesis. Okay, cool. But how to kill him without waking everybody up? Ideally, I'd just like him to vanish. I'd also prefer to kill him now, instead of having to retrace my steps later. Nathan looked up at the ceiling above his head. This suite didn't have the magical reinforcement of the previous one, so he had more options. He used his aura to tunnel up into the stone of the ceiling, then navigated himself over the bed through the rock of the academy. It was easy to position himself properly using the Archmage's enormous mana pool as a marker. Then he dropped down through the ceiling, leaving a hole in the smooth stone, and standing on the air inches above the Archmage's sleeping body. He carefully moved an arm that was draped across his target's chest, then seized the man underneath the armpits and drew him upward smoothly. He stuffed the Archmage through the hole in the ceiling, clamping a hand across his face and dousing him in anti-magic. The man woke up slowly, groaning into Nathan's hand, and taking a moment to comprehend his situation. Nathan kept half his attention on the room below, watching to see if anybody had noticed the abduction. If so, he worried he'd have to kill all of the mages as quietly as possible and hoped none of the people in the central area heard anything. He hoped the Archmage's bedmates would think he'd gotten up to go sleep somewhere else. The 2 women who'd been sleeping on either side of the man had woken up, and they looked around blearily. They were both mages, and the hole Nathan had used to enter and exit the bedroom was directly overhead. It was closing, but it would be another few minutes before the academy sealed up his entry point. Don't look up, don't look up. He flexed noticeability to divert their attention, and it seemed to work as one of the 2 women pulled up the disturbed blanket, then snuggled closer to the other mage and pressed a sleepy kiss to her brow. High-tier noticeability 8 achieved. At this point the Archmage had already tried casting a few spells, and he started to struggle and squirm. He yelled into Nathan's hand, the sound coming out as a muffled grunt. Nathan tightened his grip and popped the man in the nose with his other hand, stunning him for a second. His rage came easily, and he kept one hand over the man's face and reached his other back to grab the back of his neck. Then he wrenched the Archmage's head around, snapping his neck. An amulet around the man's neck tried to activate to heal the injury, but Nathan crushed the magic absent-mindedly as he started to tunnel upwards. I've gotten a lot stronger since I tried to do that to that kid back in Housemate, the one who'd enslaved Egol. Magekiller has leveled to 241. You have assassinated Archmage Glor Dho Chuvis in his own quarters, evading notice by even those in his bed. Damn. Gonna need to get another one before I develop Magekiller. Maybe I should go back to the orgy. Nah, might as well go for another Archmage. Nathan dumped the body on the roof of the tower, ensuring that it wouldn't slide off the steeply tilted spire. Then he looked across at the next tower, noticing that the protective gravitational barrier didn't cling to each tower, but instead stretched overhead like a huge dome of high-pressure death. I can just fly between the towers.